Hey everyone, Arms here. Today I have a highlight from one of my streams in which we watched some videos rating summon weapons in Terraria, and we criticized them a little bit. We mentioned where they were good, where they were bad, and then we ended it with making our own summon weapon tier list. I'm going to have time codes both in the description and on the screen for when the tier list starts if you just want to watch that. So thank you very much. Have a wonderful day. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I have more videos like this and other different types of videos coming soon. I appreciate every single one of you. Thank you so much for watching. Have a wonderful day. Listen, chat. Okay? I found some videos on YouTube. I was thinking of doing my own little summon weapon tier list, right? And I saw these videos, and they are garbage. This is some of the most garbage tier lists I've ever seen, chat. I'm serious. These are awful. These are so insanely awful in just a way that I cannot describe. So I want to react to them with you guys and also react to this video, the best summon weapons in Terraria 1.4, right? And to see what these people have to say, because I think they're absolutely wrong. And then we're actually going to make our own summon weapon tier list with all of the summon weapons in the game, except this one is missing Abigale's flower, but I can explain where Abigale's flower goes. Okay. But yeah. So first off, let's do this one. This one has 400,000 views. 12,000 likes, chat. Okay. I'm sure this person is a wonderful person, but this tier list is not good, chat. It's not good. Okay, so let's check out their tier list starting off, okay? Okay, chat, right? So, let's look at the S tier, right? So we start off with the S tier. Terra Prisma. Not bad. Not bad, right, chat? Terra Prisma. Not bad. Terra Prisma's pretty good. Stardust Dragon Staff. Okay, so far, so good. Oh, let's look at the A tier. Okay. Tempest Staff, not bad. Stardust Cell Staff, I don't know why it's an A below some of these other ones. I mean, it has equivalent DPS, like literally. And in fact, you can probably get it higher DPS than some of these other things above it. But okay. But then let's, you know, and then, but my eyes are drawn to something so confusing, chat. And that is the Desert Tiger Staff in S tier. In S tier. The Desert Tiger Staff is standing on the same tier as the Terra Prisma, the Stardust Dragon Staff, and the Xeno Staff, and the Sanguine Staff. What? What is this nonsense? What is this absolute nonsense? The Desert Tiger Staff? Chat? I don't know how many of you use Summoner very often, but this is an absolute garbage weapon, okay, chat? For a Summoner weapon, it's garbage. And Summoner has a lot of garbage weapons, you know, as you can see in some of these later tiers. Okay, so then we get to A tier, right? Yes, but it's okay, first off, it can only focus on one enemy at a time, and its damage is pathetic compared to everything else on this list. I can guarantee you that. Okay? CBV, we'll get into the tier list why it's so garbage. I know it can stack higher damage just like the Stardust Dragon Staff, but it's slow. It can't catch up with you. Okay? Okay, CBV? Like, there's an inherent problem with summon weapons that I think makes the Sanguine Staff like top 3. Like, I legit think the Sanguine Staff is better than like the Xeno Staff. And I think like, for example, Sanguine Staff is top 3, and it's an issue we can get into talking about. But let's talk about some of the other stuff on this tier list particularly as well. So what I'm wondering, right, is what is the methodology of this tier list? What is the methodology? Because that's in something important to tier lists. You need a consistent methodology for a good tier list, right? So for example, there's a few different methodologies you could use for a summon weapon tier list. You can say, how good are they at the point in the game that you get them? Or just how good are they overall? And if you're going to go with how good they are overall, then like Tiger Staff would be C tier, because there's literally zero reason to use it over anything in this tier and most of the things in this tier, except for this probably. The Tiger Staff is probably better than the Pygmy Staff because the Pygmies are grounded summons. This is, so A tier is okay, except for the Pygmy Staff. The Pygmy Staff is like B or C tier. You can maybe say B tier. Here's the thing that a lot of people don't understand, chat, about these tier lists is I think people just fight the bosses. And then just see the damage per second rather than actually actively fighting the boss. Like, also, I don't know what difficulty this person plays in, right? If you're playing in normal mode, maybe this makes sense. But if you're playing in master mode as a summoner, where every hit can kill you, you need to be insanely mobile. So in reality, something like the Tiger Staff or even the Xeno Staff falls off because you need to be running away from the bosses so much that when you're within range of the boss may have more damage than the Sanguine Staff, but the moment you're running away from the boss and the minions can't catch up with you, its damage goes to 0 until you compromise your ability to move, right? Which is why I'd say the Sanguine Staff is like top 3, top 4. You know, these 3 I think are the top 3 probably objectively, but I think the Sanguine Staff edges out at least this one sometimes. Because every attack it does, it comes right back to you. So that means you never have to worry about being far away from your summon and your summon needing to catch up with you. Okay. Now we can go in B tier. Why is the Vampire Frog Staff in B tier? It's okay. It's good for when you get it, right? But the Vampire Frog Staff is in the same tier as the Deadly Spear Staff. I'm sorry, but the Deadly Spear, there's no world where the Deadly Spear Staff is worse than like the Blade Staff or the Pygmy Staff. Right? It's a flying minion that does pretty decent damage and it pierces multiple enemies, so it's better for mobbing as well, right? So that's another thing that I'm wondering is like and that's why I talk about the methodology of the arrangement of these weapons, right? Is it the point at the game when you get it? It's obviously not, because if it's supposed to be the point at the game when you can get it, this would be like S tier for the point at the game you can get it, because like you can get this or this or this or this basically at that point, right? Because this is like sort of a pre-boss. Pre-boss summons are the Slime Staff, the Finch Staff, the Snowflake Staff, and the Vampire Frog Staff. Those are your pre-boss summons in Terraria. And like these 2 I'd say are the 2 best pre-boss summons you can get a hold of. Now you can also cheese and only get enough. Now if you were to you can consider the Imp Staff a pre-boss summon as well, I'd say, because you can get the Imp Staff before technically beating any boss. You just need to get enough tissue sample or shadow scales from the Eater of Worlds or Brain of Cthulhu. And the Brain of Cthulhu, it's very easy, as I've shown in many of my videos, just to kill a few of its creepers and then get a few tissue samples, make a Deathbringer pickaxe, and then dig down to hell and get this. So you could even consider the Imp Staff a pre-boss. Because you can get the Imp Staff before technically beating any boss, if this is supposed to be at the point that you get it, then this should be S tier. Right? So it's obviously, the methodology of this tier list is obviously not at the point that you can get it. It looks like maybe it's trying to do overall, but that doesn't make any sense either, because the Deadly Spear Staff would be so much better than the Pygmy Staff overall. And the Blade Staff is worse. It has lower DPS than everything in this tier, objectively. Like, it objectively does. The Blade Staff is amazing for when you can get it, especially if you can set up if you do the right setup for it, but it just does have lower DPS because it's a beginning of hard mode summon, right? It seems like there's no consistent methodology to this, and it looks almost a little random. Now, in the rest of this video, they just go through explaining each of the summons. I was watching this. I don't really have a problem with what they have to say about each of the summons, like the Imp Staff. Let's see what they have to say about the Imp Staff, right? I think it's a bit more objective. Like, they say, the Imp Staff is crafted with 17 Hellstone bars made with the Hellstone Forge. While some people prefer the Hornet Staff, the Imps are generally also a great choice, although they do have a tendency to miss their projectiles. Fair enough, okay? Fair enough. So a lot of these criticisms are fine, but this tier list is just really bad. And then they have this progression chart too. They're telling you to use the Desert Tiger Staff after the Sanguine Staff. And this is, again, why I say I don't think this person actually plays Summoner, or at least they don't play Summoner in Master Mode or Expert Mode. Because the Sanguine Staff literally carries you to the Moonlord more than the rest of these, honestly. Because like I said, the Sanguine Staff has that consistency. When it attacks, it comes back to you every single time. Here, let's see if we can find the part with the Sanguine Staff, right? Sanguine Staff. The Sanguine Staff also should be at, like, it would be S tier no matter what, because you can get it at the beginning of hard mode pre-bosses. And look, so look at the motion of attack for the Sanguine Staff, right? It attacks and it comes back to you. It attacks and it comes back to you. The reason why that's different from other summons is if we look at, for example, let's look at the Desert Tiger Staff, for example. You see how it stays on the enemy and then it has to come back to you after it's done attacking? If you're fighting a boss like the Empress of Light and you're running away from the Empress, the minion has to catch back up to you before it can start attacking again. So you actually have to slow down running away from the Empress of Light before it can start doing damage again. So maybe there are certain situations where you can get the Desert Tiger Staff to have more DPS, but your DPS then goes to 0 as you're running away, and then you need it to catch up to you, which is definitely something that people don't consider. Okay, let's check out this tier list now. This one only has 2,000 views, so it's not, but it's worse, honestly. And it also, this one is really, really bad. So we start off, the S tier is actually totally fine in my opinion. S tier is totally fine. Okay, this is a good, I think this is a solid S tier for the Terraria, or solid S tier for a Terraria summon weapon tier list. Of course, none of these weapons consider neither of these tier lists consider sentries or whips, which we're going to be considering in our tier list. But with how bad their other tier lists are, I can imagine that they wouldn't rate those that much better. So let's look at, so S tier is totally fine. Terra Prisma, Xeno Staff, Stardust Dragon Staff, and Sanguine Staff. That's a solid S tier. You can argue that those are the four of the best in the game. Probably the 4 best in the game. Maybe the Cell Staff actually deserves to be an S tier as well, but that's a conversation. So, what you might ask, what is the methodology of this tier list? Again, I'm not sure. Is it at the point that you're supposed to get it? Is it? It looks like it might be at the point you're supposed to get it, right? But if it's at the point that you're supposed to, and what are they considering? I think both of these tier lists put Slime Staff into S tier because of how hard it is to get, which I think is fine. The Slime Staff is very weak with and 1 in 10,000 drop chance. Yes, so that's I think that's totally fine. But then you go to things like the B tier. I'd argue the Desert Tiger Staff even being an A tier is weird, and the fact that like the Vampire Frog Staff is in the same tier as the Blade Staff, or I think Imp Staff being an A tier is actually totally valid if you're considering at the point in the game where you can get it, because you can get it before beating any bosses technically, right? So this tier list has some totally different problems. You like particularly the B tier and the C tier. Why is the Spider Staff and the Finch Staff in the same tier as the Stardust Cell Staff? The Stardust Cell Staff is literally a S tier item, and it's being like almost insulted by, I think people just don't use the Stardust Cell Staff because if you're using a Stardust weapon, you're using the Stardust Dragon. But the Stardust Cell Staff has amazing DPS. Chat. Like, I don't know, again, I don't know how many of you play Summoner. I play Summoner religiously. I have 4,000 hours in Terraria, and I'd say about 2,000 to 3,000 hours of that playtime is from Summoner. From the beginning, from the moment it was released, I played Summoner so much, okay? So, we go to C tier now, and C tier is even weirder. You have Abigale's Flower and the Deadly Spear Staff in the same tier as the Tempest Staff? Chat? The Tempest Staff? What is the methodology of this tier list? It seems, again, both these tier lists seem to be a mix of the point that you can get it and how strong they are overall, which I think you can manage that better than these tier lists manage, but they just like, this for this weapon, they're like, oh, this is a Duke Fishron weapon, so it should be better. When in reality, you can beat Duke Fishron before the mech bosses. right? And then you can have this for the mech bosses, as we saw in my 100 Day Summoner Master Mode series. The Tempest Staff destroys like Plantera. It destroys the Destroyer, no pun intended. Like, if you combine this with the Firecracker, it does massive damage. Now, yes, it's not great against like the Twins or the Empress of Light because they move too fast for it. But does that make it C tier? No, I think it's at least a B tier. I would say A tier, but that's my bias because I love the concept of it personally, in my opinion. I think C tier is totally no. And then we have Abigale's Flower in C tier. I think Abigale's Flower is probably top of C tier, but I think it's also a weapon a lot of people misunderstand and haven't really got time to utilize properly yet. I'm working on a video right now, and it's titled How Strong Can You Make Abigale's Flower? I will say this, chat, right now, I was able to get the Abigale's Flower to over 13,000 DPS. 13,000, not 1,300, 13,000 DPS under the right setting. Okay, chat? That is higher than most of these other weapons can reach. In fact, I think it might be higher than any of these other weapons can reach. Abigale's Flower is extremely powerful under the right circumstances. I would argue it's B tier. But the problem with the Abigale's Flower is that it gets stronger in hard mode. So in normal mode, it's like a C tier, D tier summon, honestly. It's bad. But in hard mode, it becomes like top of C tier, maybe B tier summon. Depending on the boss, if you're using it against the Destroyer, the Abigale's Flower is maybe even A tier if you're looking at individual bosses. It can get A tier if you're looking at how these perform against individual bosses. Now, obviously, these lists are supposed to be an average of against bosses as a whole, right? But like, I don't know. It's just these tier lists. Just I don't know. I don't think these people play Summoner all that often, which is fine. But like, this one is 2,000 views. Whatever. Who cares? This one has 400,000 views, and this one might be worse. Oh shit! What's up? This one, I can't tell if this one's worse. Which I don't know, chat. For those of you who are in chat, which one do you think is worse? This first one or the second one? Like, I think they both have different problems. I think the second one might be worse. Yeah, I don't know. What do you guys think? So let's check out this video. This is ranking the top 5 summon weapons in the game, chat. 100,000 views. Good views. This guy's actually a good YouTuber. I've enjoyed his Terraria videos over the years. Okay. But I just think people have okay, Lewis. I just think people have a giant misunderstanding of the summoner class overall.
Humble opinion. So if you think... Hello friend, welcome to a list of the top 5 summon weapons in Terraria 1.4. This will probably be one of the most predictable lists ever, but if you're new and wondering what exactly are the best summons, then here you go.
Okay.
This list is my humble opinion, so if you think that there's something I missed or should not have put on the list, feel free to comment down below.
Fair enough.
And I aim to entertain you, encourage you, and offer you a place to call home. So
this guy's really nice, a really great YouTuber. I don't want to shit on him in particular because I like him.
The Blade Staff is a summon weapon dropped from the enchanted enemies.
Okay. He has Blade Staff at number 5. That, I think, is a little overestimation of the Blade Staff, but I also respect it. Because I think the Blade Staff is really underrated.
It's quite hard to get your hands on one, considering how rare these enemies are. But well, it's quite worth it.
I see. So he made this video before they added the Blade Staff to the Queen Slime drop pool. That's actually definitely an important detail.
The enchanted dagger minions.
Yeah. Okay. You know what? This guy knows what he's talking about here. This is a blind reaction, chat. I will say. And another thing I want to say, chat, is attack speed is actually really important. Very important for summon weapons in a way that you guys might not even understand. There is a concept that we're going to be covering in the next part of the whip only master mode series called whip effect stacking, in which if you hit a single enemy with multiple whips, you can get all of their effects. So let's say you can take the leather whip and the snapthorn and get both of their summon tag damages on an enemy at once, as long as you constantly switch between the 2 whips. So when it comes to a weapon like the Blade Staff, it has one of the highest attack paces in the game. It attacks very, very quickly.
In something like Skeletron Prime.
It attacks
My
very
only gripe with
quickly.
the summon is the
So
fact
if
that
you
it's
get
pretty rare.
multiple
Plus, if you're
different
going full summoner, you might not use the golden shower, which really
summon
makes a huge
tag
difference.
damage effects on a
next
boss,
weapon I want to mention is the
it
Sanguine
benefits
Star,
from it
obtained from
greatly.
the Dread Nautilus.
Okay,
The
so
Dread
at
Nautilus-
number 4 he has the Sanguine Staff, right? Okay, number 4 is the
versus an
Sanguine
enemy
Staff.
summoned by fishing in a blood moon. It's
I would say
relatively
Sanguine
rare
Staff
and
is
quite
like
tough to
top
take
3
down.
potentially,
Luckily
but
for you, I've got a nice farm you can utilize to cheese it, so check that out if you want. The Sanguine Staff drops at a 20% rate, which is somewhat decent. This weapon summons Sanguine Bats, which look really cool and are pretty strong. They have high knockback, which protects you from enemies that come too close. I feel that the main appeal in this weapon is its range and reliability. The Sanguine Bats have insane range. They can hit enemies far away from you.
this guy knows what he's talking about, actually. I'm actually really impressed. I'm actually genuinely really
which makes
impressed
them
with
my
this
preferred
guy.
contender in the Empress of Light fight. I mean, look at this. They're basically hitting her off screen, which really keeps
Yeah.
me safe from my attacks. Well, the range and damage combined just means that you've got yourself a consistent DPS weapon, which allows you to focus more on dodging as a squishy summoner.
Okay, I actually, this guy is actually knows what he's
What I
talking
don't
about.
like about this weapon, however, is that there's no way to use it behind walls. Unlike minions
Yeah.
like the twins or the deadly spheres, you can't summon the bats outside a safety box.
Okay,
They also
that's
won't target
definitely a
enemies outside,
legitimate
but I guess
criticism
it's
if
more
you're
of a
someone who likes to
This
utilize
weapon-
cheese in Terraria, right? Cheese in Terraria is actually, I think, an considered factor when it comes to weapons. How much can you use the weapon to cheese bosses? Because there's a lot of stuff in Terraria that's just really difficult, and a lot of people utilize cheese in Terraria, which is something that I tend to forget about because I try as hard as I can to like fight bosses honestly, but I've been utilizing cheese more recently in some of my challenge playthroughs, and it really shows you how how useful it can be in certain situations. You guys will see more of that in the Whips Only Master Mode stuff. But I think that's a valid criticism of the Sanguine Staff, is you cannot use it to cheese and hit enemies behind walls.
Probably be too
That is
overpowered if you
definitely,
could pass through
that
it.
is, because that's a benefit
The other
of
thing
the
is,
summoner
bats always fly
class,
out,
is you
turn to
can
you, then fly out
you
again.
can be
That
in a
makes them
box
pretty slow.
protected, and
You've
then
only
you
got-
could be in a box protected and then summon your summon outside of the box, and it'll deal with the enemies out there. That is definitely a valid criticism,
Stick
I
to an
will
enemy
say.
and deal-
See,
the
look,
Xenostaff-
okay, look at this, look at this. See, it's the thing that I was talking about, the Xenostaff, is being showed right here in the video. Watch how when he gets just a little too far away from the lunatic cultist, his Xenos, the Martian saucers are trying to get to him and
Next
not
we go-
attacking. So
Summon
in
weapon
these
is the
moments,
Xenostaff, which is dropped
you
from the Martian saucer minions.
literally have 0 DPS. Where when it comes to like the Sanguine Staff that he showed earlier, with this spacing right here, the lunatic cultist is like maybe right here. If you were able to see where he was, right? The Sanguine Staff would be attacking in that moment, whereas the Xenostaff is just busy
The Xenostaff is
chasing
one of the
him before it's
reliable,
allowed to
high-damaging
attack the
summons
cultist.
out there.
You see what I'm
It summons
saying?
level minions
See what I'm
to
saying,
teleport
chat?
and strike the enemy. That shows you how to cheese the newly updated one, but that's beside the point. Even when you finally get
I
your hands on one,
don't think the
you find
Martian
that you
boss
replace
is
it
all that
pretty
hard,
quickly.
chat. I
You
think
can
it's
easily
pretty
take down the
hard, but
lunatic cultist
like
with it, but once you do and take down the
I
stars
think
as
like
well,
the
Xenostaff
I think
becomes
like
pretty
I mean
valuable.
I don't know. I don't think the
I
Mar
think
I
it's
think
a
the
lot.
Martian
With a bit of time,
invasion
I
is
can
really
use one
hard,
isn't
but the
too
boss itself really isn't that
Well,
hard.
next on our list, we have both the Stardust Dragon and the Stardust Cell Summons. These are crafted using Stardust
Okay,
fragments and an
okay. You
ancient
see,
utility.
this is so simple, but so big brained at the same time. All of these lists put the dragon up here, and then like the cell staff. This one is probably worse because it has the dragon in S, but the cell staff in B. What the heck? Or this one? Why are these two have similar damage outputs? I think this one has a little higher damage output with Stardust armor, because you get that extra minion, and those extra minions help this more than it helps this. But like, it's not justifiable to put them in different tiers in the same tier.
So that's right.
I
we
will
don't have any
say,
post-moon lot
like,
summons.
because that's
I mean, we
such.
do-
I don't think he understands how big brain of a take that is compared to most people. It looks like. I respect this guy. I actually
don't.
respect this list.
Stardust
Honestly, chat, the Stardust Dragon Staff might be better than the Terra Prisma. The Terra Prisma is such an epic weapon, and being able to get it from the satisfaction of getting it from beating the Empress of Light without getting hit is definitely adds to its coolness factor. But I'm gonna be honest with you, chat. I think the Stardust Dragon Staff might be able to outdamage the Terra Prisma most of the time. Like it's kind of sad.
Once it curls around an enemy, poof.
It
Absolutely.
also doesn't suffer the problem of needing to catch up with you, but neither does the Terra Prisma really.
Amazing.
But this has more range than the Terra Prisma. Like it can target from farther away than the Terra Prisma. I've noticed as well.
The Stardust
From my
Dragon has
own
been strong
testing.
Even before one.
It's
Deadly Spheres and
okay.
Ravens are great as well,
Like,
but
it's
compared to the main
fine.
summons that we have, they're just
But
poor
like,
in comparison.
so look at this, right? all of these lists. So you see, he's using the Deadly Spear Staff against the Martian Saucer right now, right? Right? You see,
Spears and Ravens.
right? Both of these lists put the Deadly Spear Staff way under the Desert Tiger Staff. Look at this. Look at this. Where's the Deadly Spear Staff right here? Boom. B tier, S tier, C tier, A tier. What? The Deadly Spear Staff is objectively better than the Tiger Staff. Objectively, no question. Because it's a flying minion. Every minion that can fly is objectively better than all of the other non-flying minions. Like, objectively. There's no question about it. There's no question. Absolutely, like, that is just unarguable.
Are great as well, but compared to the new summons that we have, they're just pale in comparison.
Yeah. No,
Without further ado,
the Deadly Spear Staffs used to be really good, comparatively, but they really got, like, destroyed by what's that called? Like the snowballing effect of the newer summons that are much stronger.
Number 1 spot is everyone's favorite, the Terra Prisma.
Terra Prisma.
The Terra Prisma is a new summon only obtainable in one way. You have to defeat the Empress of Light fully in the day. That might sound okay, but in the day, the Empress one-shots you with any attack, even contact damage. This means
I'm actually really triggered by the fact that he's using the Sanguine Staff with the Dark Harvest. This is actually really triggering me. Yo, what's up, Risk? How you doing today? This is actually okay. This guy's opinions so far have been great, but I'm kind of triggered by the fact that he's using the Sanguine Staff with the Dark Harvest. Why would you, if you have the Dark Harvest, you can get the Morning Star, which gives you 5 Fin Staff more powerful than the Desert Tiger Staff confirmed. No, okay. If you had the Morning Star is slow, I get it, right? But it gives you 5 summon tag damage and a 5% chance for your summons to crit. That's insane, chat. That's insane. I'm sure you guys might realize how insane that is, because they cannot crit whatsoever. They cannot crit whatsoever. But with the Morning Star, you get even a chance to crit with the attack speed. That's just this guy's opinions have been fantastic so far, but I'm triggered that he's using the Dark Harvest.
The damage output is insane. Not to mention, it looks
I think you can argue the Terra Prisma is the best.
I do admit that in some cases, especially for immobile enemies, the dragon still does more damage overall.
Yeah, I think so. I think I think for mobbing, the Terra Prisma is better, but for a lot of bosses, I think the Stardust might be better. But it really depends. I think the Stardust and the Terra Prisma are like kind of equal in terms of goodness. They're just good in different. Oh yeah, Abigale is stronger than the. Okay, chat. Actually, Abigale is insanely strong. Like I said earlier, for you weren't here for that, Brisk. I have a video I'm working on right now called "How Strong Can You Make Abigale's Flower?" And I get Abigale's Flower to 13,000 DPS under the right circumstances. The Abigale's Flower is definitely better than the Tiger Staff. Now, if you were to bring the Tiger Staff into a pre-hard mode world, the Tiger Staff would be better. But in a hard mode world, Abigale's Flower is better than the Desert Tiger Staff. No, Abigale's Flower is actually better than the Desert Tiger Staff. No, no shot it is. If you have summoned a lot, yeah. It's definitely better than the Desert Tiger Staff, actually, in my opinion. I don't know. Okay. So this video actually wasn't that bad. This video was I think it had almost zero problems. Oh, there's something in my eye. What the heck? This video had almost 0 problems. The only problem was him using the Dark Harvest. Like, that is just there's literally like the Morning Star is even longer than the Dark Harvest. So like you get everything. It's just slower. But if you're worried about the Dark Harvest being slower, you can just hit some Empress with the Dark Harvest and then switch to the Morning Star and get an attack speed boost. Now, chat, for the main event, and that is creating our own summon weapon tier list, chat. Okay. So we talked a lot in this stream so far about methodology of a tier list. I think the methodology of a tier list is what's most important, chat. Because if the methodology of your tier list is flawed in some way, then it totally ruins the tier list's foundation. If the methodology of a tier list is flawed, it ruins its foundation from the beginning and therefore cannot recover from there. So, In this tier list, we are going to be mostly basing it off of how good it is at the point you get it. At the point you can get it. Whether you can cheese getting it or not, right? So let's get into the tier list, and I guess we can order these things. And it looks like this tier list has like all of the old ones army things condensed into one. However, so I was talking about methodology for the old ones armies ones. It's a lot harder to rank those. I'll say that I'll try to rank them both on their usefulness in the Old Ones Army event and in just normal play. And I will consider like being able to cheese with. I'm not going to consider cheeses. So like where is it? This one, the electric field, the one that creates the electric field. What's it called? The lightning aura staff. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, the lightning aura stuff. There is some cheese you can do where you can absolutely shred some bosses with the lightning aura staff if you have the old one's army going, collect enough of the mana crystals, and then summon a bunch of these in one spot and then kill a boss instantly. There's a YouTuber who's done some stuff with that, but I'm not going to be considering that, I will say. But yeah, let's get into this. So, the Ballista Staff. Now, I will say the Ballista Staff is, I'm going to go with A tier. And let me tell you why, chap. The Ballista Staff that you get is probably, the Ballista Cane is the first one you can get, right? After, you know, you can get it right away after beating the Old One's army, or before even beating the Old One's army, but you need to beat the Old One's army to use it. Is best for the event itself. Yeah, Old One's army is best for the event itself. But I think there are, so the ones that are, I will say ones that are only good for the event itself, I'll put in C tier for now, and then we can argue it out later, chat, right? I'll put them in C tier for now because they're great for the event itself. The Lightning Aura is best for the event itself. Yeah, I will put these, we'll reorder these a little bit. I think the Ballista Staff is A tier for sure. Maybe you can make an argument for S tier, but I'm going to go with A tier because I don't want to put too many things in S tier. I want S tier to be special. And the main reason why the Ballista Staff is so good is, and as you guys might have seen in my Summoner 100 Days series, you can use it as a magic weapon, which is really important for the Wall of Flesh. It makes the Wall of Flesh fight actually really easy as a summoner. In fact, I think it makes the Wall of Flesh fight one of the easiest fights in a summoner playthrough. Like really, because you're just running away and shooting it. You don't even have to aim. It aims for you. I think it makes the Wall of Flesh fight one of the easiest fights, right? Especially if you're combining it with the Obsidian Armor, which just gives you an insane summon damage boost for the point in the game that you can get the armor. It just makes the Ballista Staff so strong. So I'm going with A tier for the Ballista Staff. Now, for the Blade Staff. This might be a controversial opinion for some of you. S tier. Blade Staff is S tier. Now, you might ask, how is the Blade Staff S tier? Well, we are considering at the point in the game that you can get it. And you can get the Blade Staff before beating any bosses or just by beating the Queen Slime. Because you can get it in the Hollowed Underground, but now they made it easier to get by just beating the Queen Slime. And we all know the Queen Slime's really, really easy to defeat, even in Master Mode. The Queen Slime is like one of the easiest bosses in the game. For the point that you fight her. Obviously, she's objectively harder than most pre-hard mode bosses. But she's I think like Queen Slime's easier to fight than the Deerclops, like in terms of what gear you have access to when you can fight it, but that's a whole other conversation. Blade Staff is definitely S tier. Now the Blade Staff has the lowest base damage, I think, of almost anything on this list except for like the Finch Staff. In fact, let's fact check that. The Blade Staff's base damage is 6. 6 base damage. What is the base damage of? Okay, no, the Lightning Aura Rod actually has 4 base damage. But that's like a really weak one. Let's see. What? Yes. No, the Finch Staff has a higher base damage than the Blade Staff, chat. A higher base damage. The Finch Staff's base damage is 7. Does that mean it's better? Absolutely not. Abigale also has a base damage of 6. Abigale's Flower also has a base damage of 6. But the only summon weapon that has a lower base damage is the Lightning Aura Rod, the first Lightning Aura summon that you can get access to. Okay? The Blade Staff has an insanely low base damage, but, and I mean but, its attack speed and its armor penetration is through the roof. Like that video said, I believe it has a 25 armor penetration. And a 25 armor penetration is already substantial on its own, but you can increase its armor penetration by equipping the Shark Tooth necklace and the Stinger necklace. And you can further increase its armor penetration by activating the Sharpening Station buff and then holding a melee weapon. I'm actually going to be covering this in a video eventually, chat, but all of your minions can gain an extra 20 armor penetration from activating the Sharpening Station buff and then holding a melee weapon in your hand. You don't even have to use it as an attack, but you can increase the armor penetration of any of your summons with that method. So with that being said, when you take the attack speed of the Blade Staff, the armor penetration, how much you can increase the armor penetration, and then because of its attack speed, you counter in whip effect stacking, where you could stack summon tag damage and summon tag crit with different weapons. Let's say you can take the Durandal and the Morning Star and is enough for yes, 25 is enough for most bosses, absolutely. Yeah, 20. You're right, Chief Logan. 25 is enough for most bosses. Abigale's Flower should be in S or B or A because it's so easy to get. That's something we're going to get into. Abigale's Flower is not on this list, but we'll be talking about where Abigale's Flower will go. I might edit it into the video later. But I will say this. When you take stuff like summon stacking whip effects, you take the attack speed of the Blade Staff. So stacking the summon the whip effects, stacking the whip effects. So if you were to take like late game, let's say late game, you take the Durandal and the Morning Star and stack their effects on an enemy, and then with all the other armor penetration, the Blade Staff will go off. The Blade Staff is easily S tier when you take all of that into account. I know that might be a controversial statement for some of you, but the Blade Staff is absolutely amazing. Okay. Next up is the Cool Whip. I think the Cool Whip is a C tier whip. Now, to some of you, that might be controversial. And I will say, if you were doing a whips only playthrough like we have been doing, and I'm going to be uploading part 2 tomorrow, it's definitely a upgrade from like the Firecracker for sure. Like if you're doing only whips. But if you're actually doing a full summon playthrough, I really don't think there's a reason to use the Cool Whip over the Firecracker unless you really need that extra length. The Cool Whip has a special effect of summoning a snowflake that will deal extra damage. It's almost like it summons its own minion with its whip effect, which is a pretty cool whip effect. I'm not going to lie. It's a pretty cool whip effect. But it's so the whip you can get before it is the Firecracker, and the Firecracker is absolutely broken. We'll get into that later. And the whip you get immediately after it is the Durandal, and the Durandal is just objectively better in every way. Much higher base damage. It gives summon tag damage, I think 7. It gives the effect of increased whip attack speed. It's just the Cool Whip sits in this area where you really don't need to get it. Like you can skip it entirely, honestly. But if you do get it, like if you're going for a Frozen Feather anyway, for Frozen Wings, like let's say you enter hard mode and immediately have rain, if you're going for the Frozen Feather anyway, you can get the Cool Whip, and it's great for mobbing. But as far as making your summons better, it doesn't really do that. So C tier. Okay, next is the Dark Harvest. Right? The Dark Harvest is the third longest whip in the game, the third highest base damage whip in the game. Pretty good so far, right? And on top of that, it has an effect similar to the Snapthorn And the Durandal, where's the Durandal? What? Right here. It has an effect similar to both of them, that when you strike an enemy with the Dark Harvest, it increases your whip attack speed. And like I've said many times before, this can actually be applied to your other whips. So, let's say you're going for maximum damage against an enemy. A really great combination is combining the Dark Harvest potentially with like the Firecracker. Because the Firecracker's whip effect is actually also based on, I believe, how fast it can attack as well. Because from my experience that I've seen in some of my videos is that the higher whip speed this can have, the more its effect triggers, it looks like. Or you can combine it with the Durandal and then make the Durandal insanely fast because the Durandal gets its own attack speed boost, right? This also comes into effect in my whip-only playthrough where, honestly, I use the Durandal and the Dark Harvest together because you hit with the Durandal, you hit with the Dark Harvest, and then the Dark Harvest attacks insanely fast. So, for that reason, I'm going to put the Dark Harvest in B tier. It's great as a weapon on its own, honestly, but it doesn't really boost your summon damage all that much. But I think it's super good, and I think you can make an argument for A tier, and maybe after we have everything placed in the tier list, we might rearrange stuff a little bit. But for now, I think B tier is a perfectly fine placement for it. There's an argument for A tier. We can get into that later. Next up is the Deadly Spear Staff. The Deadly Spear Staff used to be one of the strongest summons in the game, and honestly, it really suffered from the snowballing effect of 1.4 adding so many amazing summons. But, like I said, it's a flying summon, so it inherently has a strength that a lot of other summons don't have, right? If we were to look at some of these other tier lists we were talking about before, these tier lists are putting the Spider Staff and the Lynx Staff above the Deadly Spear Staff, and I think this tier list does it as well. Okay, it puts the Spider Staff on the same tier as the Deadly Spear Staff. And it puts like the Pygmy Staff above the Deadly Spear Staff, which I think is also pretty crazy. The Deadly Spear Staff is certainly slow. It suffers from a lot of the problems that most other summons suffer from, which I was talking about earlier, where when your summon needs to catch back up with you if you're escaping an enemy, you're losing a ton of DPS because the summon is spending time catching back up with you first before going to attack the enemy again. And because it's pretty slow, it suffers from this even more than some of these other later ones, for example. That being said, it's still a flying summon. It pierces, so it's great for mobbing. It's actually one of the better ones for mobbing late game, in my opinion. All that being said, it has pretty high base damage. Its DPS is fine. You know, it's pretty fast. I'm going to put it in B tier. You can maybe argue it, like, I'd say it's the bottom of B tier. Honestly, it'll probably be on the lower end of B tier, but I think B tier is totally reasonable for it. Now, chat, we have the Desert Tiger Staff, and this item is just chat. It's laughably bad. It's laughably bad. Okay, I will say that the other two weapons in the game that are similar to the Desert Tiger Staff, the Stardust Dragon Staff and the Abigale's Flower, do what it does just objectively better, even at the point you can get the Desert Tiger Staff, and here's why. The Desert Tiger Staff has comparable DPS to the other items you can get at the same time of it. So, when can you get the Desert Tiger Staff? Well, you can get the Desert Tiger Staff after beating Plantera and then spending a ton of time grinding for the Desert Key, right? But its DPS is like comparable to the Sanguine Staff, or its DPS is comparable to like, what else is on here? So after you've beaten Plantera, you can get, you know, you may even have the Tempest Staff already, or you may even have the Blade Staff. If with the right setup, these other weapons, this Deadly Spear Staff, have like pretty similar DPS, and you're sacrificing being able to have multiple minions, right? Like, this is just a single minion that has comparable DPS to other minions that have multiple summons, and then because you have multiple minions, so like the Deadly Spear Staff, like, it can hold back multiple enemies at once because its knockback isn't that bad, and in a mobbing situation, I would always choose the Deadly Spear Staff over the Desert Tiger Staff. I do not care. The piercing, the fact that multiple enemies can be hit by it, whereas the Desert Tiger Staff only focuses on one enemy. The Deadly Tiger Staff is hilariously bad. It's hilariously bad, and I don't understand why so many people overrate it to hell. It is our first D tier summon. It is awful. It's like I said, its DPS is comparable, if not worse, to other summons you can have at the same time as it. And you're missing out on having multiple summons, so being able to damage multiple enemies at once that aren't stacked up on top of each other. It's just so bad. I don't know why so many people overrate it. That's the most crazy thing about these lists to me, is that they have the Desert Tiger Staff in S and A respectively. I respect it as an honorable mention in this list because I can imagine in normal mode the Desert Tiger Staff is pretty good. They overrate it because it's new. Yeah, probably, right? But in my opinion, chat, and I consider myself pretty knowledgeable on the summoner class overall, it's D tier. It's awful. I just think these people either don't play summoner in master mode, which is the hardest difficulty, which is the only difficulty I'm really concerned about discussing the power of weapons in, right? Master mode or expert mode, I think they're relatively comparable. Normal mode is just like, so maybe in normal mode it's better. I don't play on non-expert and master mode. In fact, I barely ever play on expert mode. I play on expert mode occasionally, but like I have this problem where I need to play on master mode because it gives you that extra accessory slot, and I love having that, even though master mode is insanely aggravating. But the Desert Tiger Staff is absolute garbage. In the realm of summon weapons as a whole, and at the point that you get it. I don't understand why people overrate it so much. Okay, next we have the Durandal. And I don't think I need to explain this. The Durandal is A tier. It's definitely an A tier weapon. It's an A tier weapon overall. 7 summon tag damage. Really great. That's really, really strong, especially with weapons like the Blade Staff, right? 7 summon tag damage. It gives the whip speed increase, so it makes itself stronger. And and let's look at the base damage increase right from the Cool Whip to the Durandal. The Cool Whip's base damage is it's 50, but the Durandal is only 55. It feels like 9 summon tag damage. I was wrong. 9. The Durandal has 9 summon tag damage. Here's where I was getting mixed up. The Durandal is higher base damage than the Cool Whip by a little bit, only by 5 actually. But it makes itself stronger by increasing its own attack speed and also the attack speed of every other whip. And it has 9 summon tag damage, which is absolutely insane. It has a higher summon tag damage than the Morningstar, but the Morningstar also has the benefit of adding critical hits to your summons, which is definitely super considerable. But actually, I would put the Durandal over the Ballista. The Ballista is like the bottom of A tier probably, because it's really, really great for the Wall of Flesh fight at the point that you can get it. But later on, it just becomes not that useful. Sentries in general become really sentries are really bad late game in Terraria, which is really unfortunate. Even like the Moonlord ones aren't great. So next we have the Finch Staff. The Finch Staff is, by many accounts, one of the first summon weapons you can get if you are lucky, right? So the 2 summon weapons you can get probably right away. Not even probably right away. Well, probably right away because they both require luck in different ways. There are 2 starting summon weapons that you can get without killing any enemies. You have the Finch Staff, right? And you can get it right away by getting lucky and finding a living wood tree in the living wood chest at a 1/3 chance. And the Abigale's Flower you can get by getting lucky and having it spawn next to a gravestone. Now, the Abigale's Flower is more controlled RNG than the Finch Staff. The Finch Staff, you can't really control RNG except by creating multiple worlds, whereas the Abigale's Flower, you can get enough tombstones to like have a wide area where it can spawn, but that also risks making a graveyard, which may or may not be a bad thing depending on how aggravated you get by getting killed constantly, especially early on. But it is one of the 2 first summon weapons you can get. And for that is an important consideration, because if you play through the game like I do, to where you restrict yourself literally to only doing damage with the items from the class that you are playing, that makes it really important. But most people don't play Terraria like that, so I will be taking that into consideration. Most people just use whatever weapons they can get their hands on. And that being said, that makes it honestly better in some ways, because it just gives you a little bit of extra damage that isn't hurting you if you're just using it along with your other weapons. So that being said, I am going to put the Finch Staff in D tier. It's not very good. I think you can make an argument for C tier because you literally kind of need it, but I would rather put it in D tier and put the Abigale's Flower in C tier, because I think the Abigale's Flower is better than it, in my opinion, in some ways, but it's also worse than it in some ways. The Finch Staff really benefits from resummoning it, removing the summon, and then resummoning it. If you can position enemies in certain ways to where they're stuck in a box and then summon the Finch Staff on them, it'll like stick to them and then do massive damage, which I think is a good argument for C tier potentially. But for now, I'm keeping it in D tier. I think, like I said, at the end, we can rearrange things again. The Firecracker is really hard for me to place. It has a really, really low whip range. A really, really low whip range, honestly. A depressingly low whip range. But its special effect is absolutely insane. It's absolutely insane. When you combine it with like the Sanguine Staff or the Tempest Staff or like literally any of the late game summons. Let me read the effect of the Firecracker for you, chap. Instead of increasing minion damage, a struck enemy is surrounded by fiery energy, which explodes the next time the minion attacks it, which deals 2.75 damage of the minion's damage. That's not just base damage, that's the damage your minion does. So if you have the damage of your minion increased a lot with like obsidian armor, you know, maybe some other damage buffs, you can get minions to do, like, I've gotten Abigale's Flower in the late game to do 500, 600 plus damage per hit when combining its base damage with the effect of the Firecracker. The Firecracker is absolutely insane. And in my opinion, it's A tier. It's A tier. Maybe it's like, I think it's either above or below the Durandal. I think you can make an argument for the Firecracker being above the Durandal and potentially S tier. I will say, I think you can make that argument. But for now, I'm going to put it under A tier, or in A tier under the Durandal, because I think you have to have the consideration of its very low whip range. It's very, very low whip range. And because its whip range is so low, like the Durandal, I think in a lot of situations beats it out. Next up is the Flink Staff. And the Flink Staff is one of the first summons you can get a hold of in the game. It's the next summon you can realistically get a hold of after the Finch Staff and the Abigale's Flower. It requires killing enemies. So when you take into consideration of a playthrough where you can only use summon weapons, then you literally can't get it until you've gotten the Abigale's Flower or the Finch Staff first. But if you consider it for a normal playthrough where you can use whatever you want, you can get it right away. And it's really good, honestly, for the point that you can get it. It's basically like the Slime Staff if it were good, honestly. It's really good. It sticks to enemies, it bounces on them, it does a ton of damage. I'm going to put it in C tier. C tier, probably below the Cool Whip. I don't think there's much to talk about with it. It's pretty easy to get. You just need gold or platinum and the fur. The Flink's fur can be hard to get a hold of sometimes, I will say, but it actually is a lot easier to get a hold of if you know that Flinxes don't spawn on most tiles in the snow biome. So what you need to do is just create an area with a bunch of wood or another block in a snow biome, and then you'll see a ton more of them spawning. That is the main consideration. Is a lot of people might find it hard to get a hold of the fur, but you can actually get the fur pretty easily by just adding non-snow biome blocks into the underground snow biome, and you'll see their spawn rate increase rapidly. So rapidly. Just because they literally don't spawn on snow, slush, or ice, I believe. Maybe ice, I'm not sure. Okay, the Hornet Staff. A lot of people might find this controversial. I think the Hornet Staff is not very good. Now, I think there actually is an argument for the Hornet Staff being pretty good with stacking summon tag damage, especially since it has a higher attack rate than the Imp Staff. Let's compare their base damages, right? So at the point you can get the Hornet Staff, you can have both the Snapthorn and the whip, the leather whip, right? And if we look at the base damage of the Hornet Staff, it is 12. And the base damage of the Imp Staff is 17. And then if you were to take the summon tag damage of the Leather Whip and the Snapthorn, you are increasing the Hornet Staff's damage to 22, and the Imp Staff's damage to 27. However, the Hornet Staff attacks at a much higher rate than the Imp Staff. Right? So I think theoretically you can get the Hornet Staff to do higher single target damage per second than you could get the Imp Staff to do. But I still think it's worse than the Imp Staff, and here's why. The Imp Staff is, for one, pierces enemies, and two, you can get the Imp Staff before many of these other summons, before many of the other pre-hard mode summons. You can get the Imp Staff by just defeating one creeper from the Brain of Cthulhu, teleporting away from the fight, or save and quitting, getting like 3 or 4 tissue samples to make the Deathbringer pickaxe. How much does it take to make the Deathbringer pickaxe? Let's see. What is that? 6 tissue samples. You can get that from defeating like 1 or 2 creepers and then teleport away from the fight. So I'd say the Hornet Staff. So you can get the Imp Staff before you get the Hornet Staff. And most people doing a summoner playthrough would do that. That being said, I think for single target, the Hornet Staff is probably better than the Imp Staff. So I'm going to put it in C tier, I'm thinking for now. And the Imp Staff in B tier. Above, honestly, I'm going to put the Imp Staff above the Deadly Spear Staff because we are also considering the point in time that you get it, right? That you can get it. And because we're considering the point in time that you can get it, the Imp Staff is very good. Honestly, that might even make it A tier. I think I might put it into A tier later on, depending. But I think in between these two right now is pretty good. We're already kind of forming a normal distribution, if you notice this, by the way, chat. The Imp Staff, you can get it basically right away. It pierces enemies. It puts them on fire. The Hornet Staff also poisons. Different enemies can be affected by those differently. But those also don't really matter because you can craft flasks of poison and flasks of fire and give those effects to your whips. So you can just, if you have the Imp Staff, then you can put the venom or the poison effect on your whip, and if you have this, you can put the fire effect on your whip. The Hornet Staff, you need to beat the Queen Bee, whereas the Imp Staff, you don't even need to beat any bosses to get it, which is why I put it above the Hornet Staff. You could argue like this potentially, like this, maybe even, which I think I might do that for now. But no, I'm gonna go with this, and we'll rearrange stuff later. The Hornet Staff is great. The Imp Staff are great, but I don't think they're A or S material, really, to be honest. Like, the Imp Staff is good for pre-hard mode, but pre-hard mode is just really easy. So both of these are great. You know what I mean? And I think the stuff that goes into S tier is the stuff like, for example, this is great. This makes the Wall of Flesh fight actually really easy. And all this stuff make hard mode easier. Okay, next we have the Kaleidoscope. No one's going to fight me on this S tier. It might be the best summon weapon in the game. It has insanely long reach. It's the longest reach whip in the game. It's tied for the highest base damage with the Morning Star, and it gives 20 summon tag damage. 20. It increases the damage of all of your summons by 20, and then it gives them a 10% chance to do a critical hit. It's insane. No one's going to argue with me on that. The Kaleidoscope is S tier. I don't even need to take time explaining it. The Leather Whip is probably D tier. Its range is so low. It does give you some summon tag damage. I might put it above the Finch Staff. But it's just not good. The Leather Whip is just, you get it, and then you can even skip the Leather Whip. I could see people skipping the Leather Whip and going right to the Snapthorn. I think D tier is very appropriate for the Leather Whip. It's your first whip that you can get technically, but like I said, you can skip it for the Snapthorn, honestly. It's okay. It's not great, but it's not bad. Okay, but yes, I think D is appropriate for the Leather Whip. I think we need to start putting stuff into E and F tier, but I don't think any of these things are like extremely horrendous, to be honest. I think so, like E, like the Pirate Staff might go into E or F, but we'll get to the Pirate Staff when we get to it. So what is this? The Lunar Portal Staff, right? So I think like we talked about earlier, sentries have really suffered um a lot in Terraria. They're just stationary. They're just stationary. The only boss that sentries help you with at all in hard mode is the golem. In fact, you can make a sentry build and kind of mess the golem up. You can really mess the golem up with a sentry build, I will say. But that's one boss. And the lunar portal staff and the other Moonlord one, what's it called? The Rainbow Crystal Staff. They're post Moonlord, and for being post Moonlord, they're not very good. I think like this one might be B tier, arguably, and this one is like C tier above all these because it's post Moonlord, but it's still like it's just not very good. Might even put it there with the Old One's Army stuff. The only like sentries are really also great for the Old One's Army because the Old One's Army sentries don't count as sentries in that fight. So you can use some of these with the mana crystals you get from that fight. And then if you have extra sentry slots, then summon a different sentry, a non-Old One's Army sentry. And that'll help you in those fights for sure. It makes them a lot easier just because you have more damage against the horde of enemies. But like for being post Moonlord items, sure, they're pretty good, but they're still sentries and they suffer from all the problems that sentries suffer. And the main problem being is that they're stationary. And so much late game in Terraria, you need really good movement speed. And therefore, the sentries just won't be able to do damage to the bosses because you'll be running away from your sentries. So in terms of Master Mode and Expert Mode, they aren't very good. I think you could probably put both of them in the C tier, but I think this one is a little better. This one can attack multiple enemies at once. The Lunar Portal Staff is pretty bad, to be honest. The Morning Star. The Morning Star is easily A tier. I'd say it's in the same range of good as these three right here. I have a hard time ordering these three in my mind because they're all very good for different reasons. The Morning Star, it gives you 5 summon tag damage. It's tied for the highest base damage whip in the game, and it gives you the 5% chance for your summons to crit, which is probably the most important thing about it. It's the first whip that you can get that gives you a chance to crit with your summons. It's really good. It does a ton of damage. It's the second longest in the game. I think you can argue it's over the Firecracker. A lot of people love the Firecracker for very valid reasons. I have a hard time ranking these. So I think this order, you can do this. Some people would argue like this, maybe, right? Like, but I think this is probably the standard order in terms of just a normal summoner playthrough, what's going to be most effective for you. The whip, it's the second longest. Sure, it's slow, but it gives you tag damage and the chance to crit. This may be able to give you higher DPS in a lot of scenarios, the Firecracker, but the Firecracker has such low range that I think for most people, they're going to find much more success with the Morning Star because of its length and therefore the ability to be farther away from the enemy. Chat, I'm going to be honest with you. The Optic Staff is a really depressing story for me. The Optic Staff was one of the first summon weapons added into the game. It gave you 2 summons for the price of 1. And they were flying summons. And, you know, one of them had a projectile and the other one, you honestly felt like you were creating an army, honestly. Because for 1 summon, you got 2 minions. And what's its base damage? Its base damage is pretty high. Its base damage is 30. It suffered from some problems with immunity frames early on, but it suffered from so basically early on in the summon weapon history chat, immunity frames were a problem where a minion attacking would create immune frames and then you would lose a lot of DPS because a lot of your minions attacks were just the enemy was immune to them because of the immune frames they were receiving from other enemy attacks. And it created a lot of problems for DPS. But in terms of mobbing, in terms of just like the weapons you had access to at the time, the Optic Staff was powerful as heck, chat. It was powerful as heck because of it just gave you an army of minions to absolutely destroy people. Sadly, it's been extremely, extremely overshadowed by so many other minions in the game. And I just like I don't even use it anymore. Because you need to beat the twins to get it, and like by the time you've beaten the twins, you have the Sanguine Staff or the Blade Staff, which just do better damage, just do much better damage. So that being said, I think it might be one of our first E tier summons. Like if you were to take it overall, it's obviously better than the normal mode summons, but we're also keep in mind, chat, we're also keep thinking about the point at the game in which you can get it, and it's just really bad. That's why the Finch Staff is like in D, I think. And, that's why some of these which are lower damage are higher, because you also have to consider the point in the game which you can get them, in my opinion. I think that's a very, very important consideration. And I think that is the most important consideration. What can you get at the same time as it? And what can you get before it? And because of that, the Optic Staff is E tier for me. It's still one of the coolest summons. I'm sure for normal mode it's great. You can feel like you're controlling an army because of the fact, like I said, it gives you 2 minions for 1 summon. But it's just not very good, honestly. It's kind of really suffered from the snowballing effect of later weapons just being so much better. Now we have the Pygmy Staff. And the Pygmy Staff... See, this is what confuses me about some of these other tier lists, is they rate the Pygmy Staff. Okay, C, that's more appropriate, but this tier list, Pygmy Staff is an A. Maybe this might be the difference between like normal mode and expert mode and master mode, but like the Pygmy Staff has 34 base damage. The Pygmy Staff has lower base damage than the Sanguine Staff. And it's a grounded minion that can't damage when you're flying, that can't attack enemies while you're flying. It's a grounded minion. Sure, it has a pretty high attack speed, and for mobbing, I'm sure it's absolutely great. It also puts the venom effect on enemies, which only 4 weapons in the game that can inflict venom. Yes, the Spider Staff, the Venom Staff, and the Queen Spider Staff, and the Pygmy Staff. So yes, just like the Spider Staff and the Queen and the Queen Spider Staff, it can inflict venom on the enemies, which is an important consideration for damage. But again, we have to consider the point in the game in which you can get the Pygmy Staff. It's a post-Plantera summon, and its base damage is lower than the Sanguine Staff while also being a grounded summon, meaning that it can't damage enemies while it's flying to catch up with you. It needs ground to land on. It's just, chat, it's E. It might be better or worse than the Optic Staff. I think it might be better. It might be worse. It's an E tier. I really don't understand how these lists overrate the Pygmy Staff so much. It's honestly really bad. It's like the fact that they rate it better, okay, so this is rating it worse as the Tempest Staff. This person's rating it better than the Tempest Staff, I'm pretty sure. No, in the same tier. Okay, I don't know how the order of this tier list goes, but like, and legitimately, I think the Abigale Flower is stronger. So next we have the Queen Spider Staff. This is a sentry, and what can I say? It's pretty bad. Its attack speed is really slow. It's only really useful. It's only really useful in like Old One's Army or just events. It's the first sentry you can get in hard mode. It's the first sentry you can get in hard mode. So that's definitely something to consider. But it's still a sentry, and it does the venom debuff. It's great for like the pirate invasion. It's great for any mobbing based event. So it's just extra. Something to consider is that it's just purely extra damage that you don't really have to worry about. And if you're just fighting hordes of enemies, it's not bad. But like bossing, it's not great. It might be at the higher end of D tier. This is probably, I don't want to underrate the Tiger Staff too much. It's definitely better than these two, even at the point that you can get it. Maybe not actually. No. It's not higher than the Finch Staff at the point that you can get it. I think the Finch Staff is pretty high for the point that you can get it, because it's literally one of the first that you can get. Next, we have the Pirate Staff. The Pirate Staff is so garbage. It might be our first F tier summon. It's grounded. It's really hard to get. You can get it early on, I guess. But it's just like, it doesn't have a projectile, I don't think. Let's see. They're grounded summons. Yes, they're grounded melee summons. So at the very least, even though the Pygmy Staff is a grounded summon, it stands on the ground, they at least have a projectile they can throw. These need to jump at and attack enemies, meaning that they can't really attack them if you're flying around. And for those of you who are familiar to Terraria, you know that you need to be flying around. So I would say that the Pirate Staff is our first F tier, and it really deserves that spot more than any other summon on this list. It is absolutely awful. It might be the worst in the game when you consider when at what point in the game you can get it. The Raven Staff. Okay. The Raven Staff used to be a controversial one because it was pretty good, but it was just so slow when it was first introduced, right? When it was first introduced, its base damage was 37, and the Xeno Staff, which you could get around the same time as it, had a base damage of 36 and a much higher attack rate, right? We'll get into the Xeno Staff later, by the way, chat. However, now the Raven Staff has the highest base damage of any summon pre-Lunatic Cultist. It has a 55 base damage. That's really high. That's higher than the Tempest Staff. That's higher than the Deadly Spear Staff. That 55 is really strong, and it's a lot faster now too as well. I believe they increased its speed. Let's look at damage increase. Flight speed doubled in 1.4.1 Journey's End. They doubled its flight speed. It is so much faster now. It still suffers from not having a great speed, but like, you know, in my 100-day Summoner series, we actually used it against the Golem to great effect. I think it's pretty good, but you have to consider the point at which you can get it. It's like C tier. It's like it has the highest base damage, but it's just so slow. Like, I'd argue the Deadly Spear Staff is better than it because you can the Deadly Spear Staff is 50 base damage, it's faster, and you can get it way earlier. So, that being said, C tier. I think under all these. Because remember, chat, we're very heavily considering, it's not just what has the highest DPS, it's also what point you can get the item and what other items can you have before it or at the same time in progression. That, I think, is what's most important for this tier list. And that's why I think it goes into the C tier. Because it has very high base damage, but at the point you can get it, you have so many other better weapons for most other things in the game. But for mobbing and for slower bosses like the Golem, I think the Raven Staff can be pretty useful. In fact, I might put it at the top of C tier, honestly. I might put it at the top of C tier. Now we come to my baby, the wonderful, the beautiful Sanguine Staff. The Sanguine Staff you can get immediately as you enter hard mode, as long as you wait for a Blood Moon. It drops from the Dread Nautilus, which is a pretty difficult boss to fight, but there's a very easy way of cheesing the Dread Nautilus. What's its base damage? 35, which is pretty. It's the highest base damage of the pre-hard mode boss summon weapons. It's the second highest. The Pirate Staff is the highest, but as you can see, base damage isn't everything, as you can see down here. But the Sanguine Staff is probably the most consistent summon weapon in the game for one reason. Every time the Sanguine Staff attacks, it comes right back to you. It hits the enemy, and it comes right back to you. There's no, it's chasing you around. There's no... We can actually show again with this video. This video was a really good video. Like, I highly recommend you guys go checking it out if you really want. You know, throw some views at this guy. Watch. So you can see, as you can see, go back a few seconds. So the King Slime is somewhere way off screen. You cannot see it on the screen. But the Sanguine Staff is attacking, and as you can see, one goes and attacks, and it comes right back to you. And it can attack from very, very far away, right? And he's only rating the Sanguine Staff as number 4 on this list. Something higher on the next highest thing on his list, the Xeno Staff. And you can see a problem immediately, right? It's not as obvious with the Duke Fishron. It's very obvious when he does. Right here. So watch this. Watch. Well, I want you guys to watch this, chat. This is a problem that all flying summons except for the Sanguine Staff has, and that is when you're far away from the enemy. Look at this. Okay, hold up. Give it a sec. So as he's watch the Xeno Staff, the flying saucers up here. Watch the flying saucers up here. As he's running away from the enemy, they need to catch back up to him first, and then they teleport right to the enemy and attack. So when you're like in this range, you get a ton of DPS, maybe probably even DPS higher than the Sanguine Staff. But the moment you run away, your DPS is 0. It's literally 0. That doesn't happen with the Sanguine Staff. The Sanguine Staff always has the same DPS as long as you're within its range. And if you leave the range and immediately enter it, there's no the minions needing to catch back up with you and then going to attack. It just, You exit the range, they stop attacking. You enter the range, they immediately start attacking again. It's S tier. It's so easily S tier. It's so good. It's consistent damage. And this may be my personal opinion. I always value consistent damage over like high peaks, but then like very low lows. So that being said, Sanguine Staff is S tier. I don't think anyone would argue me on that. I think it's definitely not the most controversial placement on this list. Now we come to the Slime Staff, chat, and the Slime Staff is F tier. It's awful. I don't think many people would argue me on this. The Slime Staff, it's okay when you can get it, like if you get lucky, but it's a 1 in 10,000 drop chance from normal slimes. I think it's a 1 in 1,000 from like Pinky, but Pinky is a rare spawn. It's just not very good. It's above the Pirate Staff in terms of the point that you can get it. It's better, but you need to get really lucky. It's just not very good. It's garbage. So we have the Snapthorn. It's the second whip you can get in the game. You can honestly go for it first. Like there's no real reason to get the leather whip for many reasons other than a completionist type thing. The leather whip does have some use, I will say, but it's mostly useless because it's not that hard to get the Snapthorn. It as was it 6 summon tag damage? Was it? What's the summon tag damage? 6 summon tag damage. That's pretty good at the point in the game where you can get it, when most of your minions are doing like, what, 8 damage, 11 damage. That's like 1.5ing their damage or doubling their damage in some cases. 6 summon tag damage is pretty good. Its base damage is 18, which is pretty good. And it has an effect where when you hit the enemy, you increase your whip speed. So it also increases its own DPS naturally. Snapthorn is very good. It's like BA material. At the point that you can get it, I think it might be better than the Dark Harvest. It might even be A material for the point that you can get it. I'm going to go B for now. I think B is pretty good. So the Spider Staff. The Spider Staff is definitely I think sometimes slightly underrated. You see, the Spider Staff is a grounded minion, and it definitely suffers from that in a lot of ways. However, there is some very effective ways to properly utilize the Spider Staff. So the Spider Staff applies the Venom debuff, and for any enemy that can receive the Venom debuff, that increases its DPS by quite a bit. It clings to enemies. So it clings to enemies, so it actually can do some pretty good DPS comparable to a lot of these other higher tier ones. But the problem is, like I said, it's grounded. However, you can fix that by unsummoning the spiders and then summoning them directly onto your target. So I think the Spider Staff is okay for mobbing, and it's actually pretty good for bossing early on. If you don't feel like grinding for the Sanguine Staff or the Blade Staff, I think getting the Spider Staff and then going immediately for the Sanguine Staff after is a pretty optimal way of going about it. If you don't want to, you can even use the Spider Staff against the Queen Slime. All you have to do is summon your summons on the boss, like the Queen Slime or the Dread Nautilus, and they cling and they just do tick damage. But then if it moves too far away from them, they'll fall off. Then all you have to do is unsummon them and resummon them. It almost turns it into like a magic weapon that does summon damage. So I think in a lot of ways it's underrated, but because you need to use so much finesse to make it do any sort of damage in most scenarios, I think it's like a C tier. I think it's a C tier, potentially better or worse than the Raven Staff, because it's literally one of the first you can get in hard mode. It's arguably the first you can get in hard mode because it's the easiest to get. So I think because it's the first you can get in hard mode, top of C tier. Like, I could see some people arguing B tier if you can finesse with it properly, but I'm going to go with C tier because it's a lot of work for not as much reward, right? And it's more so just a summon that you get to get you your better ones, like the Blade Staff and the Sanguine Staff, which, by the way, you can get right after. Like, you usually get this and then get one of these right after, right? So it sort of just exists to get stronger weapons that you can get pretty soon after it. But you can finesse and get some good DPS with it. Okay, Spinal Tap. Spinal Tap is actually a much more recent item. It was added in 1.4.02, I think, or something. The Spinal Tap's pretty good. It's longer than the Snapthorn and has one more summon tag damage. It doesn't have its increased whip speed that the Snapthorn gives, but but it almost it almost has 11 base damage increase. The Snapthorn's base damage is 18 and the Spinal Tap is 29. And then one extra summon tag damage and a considerably higher reach than the Snapthorn. I think the Spinal Tap is probably better than the Snapthorn. It's like just a little better. In fact, I think you can argue like this. I think this is pretty good. I think this is pretty good. It's just a little better than the Snapthorn, you know. The Snapthorn's really good for when you get it, but like the Spinal Tap is also even way better for when you get it. And you can give some of the benefits from the Snapthorn to the Spinal Tap, and even without that, the Spinal Tap is still better DPS overall. A better range. I think range is really important for whips, which is definitely something that needs to be considered. Which is why these are in this order, even though they all provide insanely substantial damage increases. This one, in some scenarios, gives up better DPS than these two, but they have better range than it. So I'm going to put it in B tier above the Snapthorn. Next, we have the Frost Hydra Staff. The Frost Hydra Staff suffers from a similar issue to the Desert Tiger Staff in that it's post Plantera from the dungeon. You need to get the ice keys, so it requires a lot of farming. And it's also a sentry, so it suffers from the problems that sentries suffer from. However, it has really high base damage. What's its base damage? Like 100? Yes, 100. There we go. It has 100 base damage. And for being a sentry, it's the second highest. It's the third. Yes. So the Ballista Staff has 140. The Lunar Crystal Staff has 130, and the Hydra has 100. It's the third highest base. Third or fourth. It's the fourth highest base summon damage in the game. It's technically under the Explosive Trap, which is 126, but it's better than the Explosive Trap because it shoots a projectile. Projectile isn't very fast. It's kind of slow. But for just being a sentry, it's extra damage. It's just extra damage that you just place and you don't have to worry about. The projectile also pierces once, so it's pretty good against mobbing. And the best use of all of these sentries are going to get is from mobbing. So I will. This is gonna be tough, but I think it sits at like the top of the sentries on C tier. Like, I think at the point that you can get it, it's not bad. And remember, chat, I want to stress this heavily. I'm very heavily rating these based on the point that you can get them and their overall effectiveness, but the point that you can get them and what you can get, what you have regardless, or what you have alongside it is also very important. I think it's not bad. I think it's okay. I think you can maybe put it higher on this list, but I'm going to keep it with the other sentries in C tier. It's definitely the best of the sentries in the C tier because of the point that you can get it. It's pretty high damage. It's not bad. Okay, Stardust Dragon Staff. Stardust Dragon Staff is top of S tier. Point that you can get it, it's absolutely fantastic. Just general strength, it's tied, I think, for the strongest depending on the scenario. I think the two strongest are like probably the Terra Prisma and the Stardust Dragon Staff, just depending on the scenario. Stardust Dragon Staff, it gets stronger as you summon it. It's a Stardust tier weapon, so you expect it to be very powerful, right? It's really good. No one really underrates it. Both these tier lists we talked about earlier put it in S tier for a reason. I think they are absolutely correct. I don't think anyone would put the Stardust Dragon lower than S tier. I don't think I really need to even argue this that much. It's better than these two, even at the point that you can get it. Because it's better. It's easier to get than the Terra Prisma, and it's like just as strong, if not better, in some scenarios, depending on the boss or the mobs that you're fighting. S tier, easy. I don't think anyone would argue with me on this. So now we have a bit of a controversial one, the Tempest Staff. The Tempest Staff is a drop from Duke Fishron, which, depending on who you talk to, is either an early game weapon or a late game weapon. I consider Duke Fishron an early game boss because you can fight him and beat him before the mechs. So that being said, because that is I consider Duke Fishron a potentially early game boss because you can fight him before the mechs. I'm going to put this at the bottom of A tier. Maybe even in the middle of A tier. It has 50 base damage, which if you consider it a pre mech boss summon, which I do technically consider it to be a pre mech boss summon, that is really good. The Tempest Staff combined with the Firecracker can reach some insane DPS early on. It has the problem of having a slow projectile speed, which makes it really suffer against certain bosses like the twins, like, you know, maybe the Empress of Light, like against Duke Fishron himself. You know, if we were to consider like the Pumpkin and those enemies, right? It's definitely not great against those enemies, but I consider it an early game summon, and it has 50 base damage. I also have a big bias towards it. I really like the Tempest Staff. So that's just me. I'm not going to defend this too much because I think people could potentially understand if you consider it a pre-mech summon. So I'm putting it in A tier. Now we have the Terra Prisma. I think the Terra Prisma is S tier, obviously. It is the final, it's the reward for beating the Empress of Light without getting hit. And when you consider that, I think it's a little underwhelming, considering it's easier to get the Stardust Dragon Staff, and the Stardust Dragon Staff is equally good to it. I consider it equally good to it. Visually, I think it's the coolest summon weapon in the game conceptually. And the fact that you get it from beating the Empress without getting hit is definitely something you need to consider. Not considering that in terms of how badass it is unfair. But in terms of damage, you know, it's like comparable. I did not want to put that there. That was a misplaced placement. When you consider that, and I'll put this as well, maybe there. Both of these are just like so much easier to get than this, and they have comparable damage. Like these two definitely have comparable damage, and this thing has almost comparable damage. It's a little less. And it suffers from problems that like the Xeno Staff suffers, which we'll get into. But both of the Stardust tier stuff deserve to be an S tier. They're both great for different reasons. Particularly in Calamity, they nerfed the Stardust Dragon Staff, making this honestly better than it. But that's Calamity. This is for vanilla. Both of the Stardust stuff deserve to be an S tier. They're pretty easy to get compared to the Terra Prisma. And they're just really powerful. They're definitely more powerful than these in terms of DPS. I still think this could be potentially better than them because of the consistent damage, which I very heavily rate. But I'm trying to be more objective here. Like, I have a big bias towards these two in particular, and I'm trying really hard not to overrate them because of how biased I am towards them. So that might be causing me to put them lower than they realistically are. But I think these are fair placements, and I think these three are very fairly placed. Okay, the final two, the Frog Staff. The Frog Staff is a pre-boss summon weapon, but you can honestly get, depending on your luck with a Blood Moon, because again, a Blood Moon is a luck-based thing because you have to wait for it to spawn. I've had so many playthroughs where I don't get Blood Moons until post-Skeletron. I've had way too many playthroughs where I don't get a Blood Moon until after Skeletron. And I'm not waiting in a bed. I'm not waiting in a bed to get a Blood Moon. So that being said, I'm putting it in like C tier. Probably above the Hornet Staff, because if you can get lucky and get the Vampire Frog Staff like pretty soon into pre-hard mode, it's definitely better than the Hornet Staff at the point that you can get it. Maybe even better than the Raven Staff at the point that you can get it, I'd say. But it still requires the luck of a Blood Moon and then the luck of getting it to drop on top of that. So there's so many layers of luck you need to pass to get it. And then you need to get like a one that's decent. Like if you get a bad Reforge on it, it's just so unfortunate. I think C tier is a pretty fair placement for it. And now we go to what might be the most, now that I think about it, this might be the most controversial placement on this list. We have the Xeno Staff. Many people consider it to be S tier. In fact, I think both these tier lists we looked at earlier considered it to be S tier. Both of these tier lists placed it above the Stardust Cell Staff and the Blade Staff. Both these tier lists did, I believe. Yes. However, I'm placing the Xeno Staff at the top of A tier. The top of A tier. Now, I know what you're saying. How could you place it under S tier? Its damage is so good. Yes, its damage is good, but it requires fighting the Martian invasion. The Martian invasion is a really annoying is a really annoying event to deal with. The Martian invasion is a really annoying event to deal with for sure. Its damage is pretty good, but honestly, you can you're getting it at the end of your playthrough when you already have things like the Sanguine Bat Staff, potentially the Terra Prisma. You know, because once you have the Sanguine Staff, and at the point you can get the Xeno Staff, you can get the Terra Prisma if you're good enough, and you can get the Stardust Cell Staff and the Stardust Dragon Staff. And the Stardust Cell Staff is just a better version of the Xeno Staff. It basically is exactly the same as the Xeno Staff, but better, because it shoots projectiles that don't miss, just like the Xeno Staff. And it shoots clinging projectiles that do dot damage. I think a lot of people overrate the Xeno Staff because of nostalgia, because when summons were added, it was very clearly one of the best, if not the best. In fact, it was so good they needed to nerf it, because it was better than like the Stardust Cell Staff. They needed to nerf its attack time. And I also think they needed to nerf its attack speed because of adding whips, and whips just make it even crazier because of its high attack speed. I wouldn't be mad if people put it into S tier, but me personally, I consider it to be A tier. I rarely even use it anymore nowadays because of just how much better all of these other new summons are, conceptually, realistically. DPS might be a little better, but like we were talking about earlier, chat, the moment you get too far away from your enemy, the Xenos are trying to catch back up with you. And even if you're in range with the enemy again, they might be trying to catch back up with you, and then their damage is 0. Literally 0. Whereas when you have something like the Sanguine Bat Staff, which can carry you all the way to the Moon Lord, it's always consistent damage as long as you're within their attack range, because they attack and they come right back to you. They attack and they come right back to you. So, that all being said, I think this is going to be my summon damage tier, or my summon weapon tier list. I want to know from you guys in chat right now, do you think that there are any there are any overly egregious placements, and do you think there's anywhere we can improve? Take time to think about it for a sec. I'm going to go refill my water. Let me know in the chat. I'll think about it while I'm going to refill my water. My thing's literally empty and I'm so thirsty from all this talking. So give me a sec. I'll be right back. Let me know your thoughts.